we're,
good.
we're going live. Hang on, I'm gonna make funny faces at the camera. That's my thing.
Oh, okay.
Hello, is anyone there? Hello, hello,
Yeah.
hello. Hey, this is Warren Redlick. I'm here with, how do you pronounce your name?
Meyer.
Mayur and Thaker?
Thacker. Yep.
Mayur Thaker. Okay, so I'm here with Mayur Thaker. We are going to talk about Tesla and Tesla's competition first, and then we're going to talk about Beyond Meat and maybe some other alternative meat companies like Impossible Foods, Memphis Meats, plant-based meats, lab-based meats. But let's start with Tesla. Mayur, you were talking to, I forget the guy's name. It was in June. You had an interview, and he asked you about Tesla's competition. I think you and I both agree. You had this lengthy conversation, and you and I both agree that Tesla is killing it. Tesla is going to be very, very successful in the auto industry. My attitude has been that Ford and General Motors and Volkswagen and Toyota, most of the major OEMs, what are called OEMs, the legacy internal combustion engine car makers, they're going to collapse. They have too much debt. They don't have a viable business model to compete with Tesla. I think they might fail and get bailed out, and then they'll fail again because the bailout will impose more strings. What's your thinking about why at least some of the OEM internal combustion engine car makers will survive?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I was of previously that mindset as well, that I thought, the majority of the auto OEMs that we have today would suffer tremendous financial pressure, and many of them would, crumble underneath that. I've changed my views on that now, and I do think that GM, Ford, Volkswagen, at least those, three, plus a couple of others, I think, will end up surviving this entire tsunami. And the main reason for my thinking is that I previously thought that the advent of EVs would put significant pressure on the share prices of these companies, right? Because investors should, at least in my view, think and see that even if these companies were to transition to electric, let's just say they magically came up with long range EVs, they actually did it and pulled it off, they would still be under significant financial pressure. Why? Because the gross margins of EVs are significantly lower than the internal combustion engine, because they've built huge economies of scale already over the last 100 years or so. So they would have billions and billions of dollars of CapEx that's needed. They would need to retrain their entire workforce. They would need to forge entirely new supply chains. And they would need to spend billions on R&D for both batteries, EV engineering, long range, and autonomous driving. So this is a lot of investment that they would have to do. In return, they would get gross margins that are at best, what they already have right now. So I thought that the slow realization of that would put significant pressure on the share prices of these companies. But what's happened? The exact opposite has happened. So I think that these companies, even though there's still all these questions on whether they actually will be able to survive this, because the market has voted with confidence with their electrification plans, I think these companies have been provided a lifeline.
Wait, I'm sorry, what do you mean? Where the market has voted for what plan?
For GM and Ford. If you look at the share prices of GM and Ford, they've hit basically all-time highs. Well, GM is at all-time highs, and Ford is significantly higher in their price. And if you look at it from
why do you think their stock prices are up?
I think the market actually thinks that they will be able to survive this, and that electrification of their vehicles, of their fleet, will actually allow them to generate greater profits. That's what the belief is. I don't think that belief will actually come true, but because the market has voted with confidence with that, they're going to be able to use their share price as their ATM machine, right? So they will have access to capital markets now. And, whether or not
they'd be able to issue stock?
They will be able to issue stock. Okay. And I think if push came to shove and they needed access to funding, they would get ample funding to do it. And that's the only thing that has changed from prior to this.
Let me turn that on you. Sure, the stock's up now. Tesla only sold 500,000 cars last year. They haven't taken that much market share yet. I think that by 2023, I think in the year 2023, Tesla might sell 5 million cars. And they're really starting to cut into market share for a lot of these companies. And then you go a couple of years down the road and they might sell 10 or 15, or my ballpark for 2026 is 18 million cars. And if Tesla sells 18 million cars, and if a lot of them are robo-taxis that replace 5 cars or more, then the existing internal combustion engine manufacturers who either don't have self-driving or don't have competitive cost self-driving or competitive vehicles, really, they're just going to lose so many sales that their revenue won't allow them to make their interest payments. And that's the market doesn't see it yet, just like the market doesn't see the value in Tesla. Actually, I was surprised at your price target. Your share value for Tesla is way below mine. I mean, you're still up, right? You're like, well, nearly double what it is now, but I'm like double yours.
Well, that's because I'm not factoring in robo-taxis. That's why.
Right. So,
but yeah.
So, if you go, my thesis is that if you go a few years down the road and Tesla's market share expands, at some point that means that internal combustion engine manufacturers lose significant sales. And as they lose sales, they become unable to pay their debts and they go bankrupt, but then the governments will bail them out. I mean, we just saw Joe Biden basically say, I'm going to bail. People didn't see it that way. That's what I saw. Joe Biden basically said, whatever happens, I'm going to take care of GM and Ford, and apparently a Dutch company too.
And see, that's the second part of my thesis as well, is that GM and Ford are a little bit of a different animal because it's they're both domestic, but in foreign markets, especially in Europe and especially in Japan, like for Toyota, I don't think that their governments will allow those companies to fail.
Right, but so here's what happens. But here's what happens. I can't speak to, like, Germany wouldn't let Volkswagen fail, or I get that concept. But here in the US, if the US government bails out GM and Ford, part of the bailout is going to be you have to take care of the union workers. Part of the bailout is going to be you have to take care of the dealerships. Part of the bailout is going to be you have to take care of your inefficient supply chain. And that's going to keep them from being competitive. They're not going to let the bailouts will not allow them to change the business model so they can get rid of the dealerships and get rid of the unions and get rid of the inefficient supply chain and vertically integrate. They're not, even if they get the bailout, they won't be able to restructure their business to be competitive with Tesla, and they'll continue to lose sales.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably, I mean, I think that Tesla will have the best product offering, but keep in mind, it's not necessarily that, the best product is what takes 100% market share. I think that, what they're going to do is specialize. Like, for example, Toyota has for years specialized in one particular segment, which is the super entry level, super affordable, small sedan market. And they've dominated that market for decades now. They have the best selling small sedans, right? The Toyota Camry and the Toyota Corolla, super affordable. So, I mean, yes, Tesla is going to generate lots and usurp a lot of market share, but I think it's going to be difficult for them to really crack into that sub $20,000 and entry level car market, unless if there are things like the robo-taxi network that starts generating revenue. That's a completely different conversation at that point. But I just think that this is just sort of an opinion. It's not necessarily something that I vehemently am arguing for, but I just think that Toyota is so embedded that the governments of Japan and the governments of Germany and others just simply will not allow a foreign automaker like Tesla to completely put a sledgehammer into those companies and hemorrhage jobs.
I mean, I agree that the governments will try to stop it from happening. And you could say, like, Hyundai will be protected by the Korean government as well. I totally see that. But there's this point where, my vision, I think you share this vision, is, 5-10 years from now, the roads are dominated by robo-taxis. And some tourist from Japan flies into America and they get off the airport and they hop in a robo-taxi that takes them in a boring tunnel to their hotel, and it costs like next to nothing. And wherever they want to go, there's a robo-taxi that's really easy and really cheap. And they get home and they're like, why don't we have this here? And at first it's a few people, it's not a big deal, but at a certain point there's this question of, are governments responsive to the will of the people?
Mhm.
And in the short run, yeah, the governments will protect their established industry, whatever. Once people see how much better life is with that new thing, it becomes harder to protect them. And we have seen established companies collapse. I mean, Kodak effectively has collapsed. Kodak was, the photography industry was destroyed by smartphones. They thought it was being destroyed by digital cameras, and ended up being smartphones that destroyed them both. So
Yeah,
you would be standing in, a government would be standing in the way of economic efficiency, the environment, the well-being of their people. And at some point, if there's any responsiveness to the people at all, as opposed to the special interest of the big corporation, which maybe there is no responsiveness to the people, and it is all about the big corporation, I just think it fails on that.
Yeah, and see, that's a part of the reasoning too, is that Kodak was a part of an, unfortunately for Kodak, they were a part of an industry that didn't have any significant political ramifications if they failed, right?
I don't know
Whereas
about
the
that.
well, I mean, the auto workers, the automotive industry it just employs so many people in every country that they operate in, that they have the the backing of their local governments.
Okay.
And by the way, the other point too is that, for example, if you go back to Battery Day, there was something that Elon Musk said that I thought was profound, which is that eventually he said essentially every car company will eventually have long range EVs, and every car company will eventually have autonomy.
Right,
The difference between them and Tesla, in his view, is going to be manufacturing.
right, but there's companies in China that get it, and that don't suffer the same bureaucratic problems and political problems and stakeholder problems that General Motors and Ford and Volkswagen and Toyota have. And so BYD, I'm not sure BYD is the best example, but NIO, I think that we will see Chinese companies rise, and they have low cost of batteries, and they have low cost of manufacturing. And it's not so much that Tesla alone is going to wipe out the OEMs. It's that the next generation of EV makers, particularly out of China, are going to take out the OEMs. Anyway,
fair point. Yeah.
Let's move on. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. I didn't want to dominate the conversation with Tesla, but I thought that because I heard you say that, I just wanted to get into a little bit. What I'm really excited about, because I made a video about this before. I don't know if you saw my video about this. I'm really excited about alternative meats, and I'm going to set the stage for this a little bit. I love burgers. I love steaks. I love bacon. I love shrimp. I'm a big meat eater. I mean, I eat a lot of things. I'm kind of on a low carb diet now, so I'm eating more meat now. Salami, ham, whatever. And somewhere in the last year or so, I discovered this concept of Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods. And my first reaction, the Beyond Burger, the Impossible Burger, which are burgers that are made from plants. They basically grow sort of peas maybe, and they go through this process to convert it to basically change the molecular structure of that protein and other things. So it actually has the molecular structure of a burger. It's amazing stuff. When I first saw it, before I had really understood what the business was, what they were doing, what the science was, I was like, oh, I would never eat that. And I talked to people like, oh, I would never eat it. That's a fake burger. Well, how do you know it's a fake burger? So I've had a Beyond Burger at a place called BurgerFi. I've had an Impossible Whopper at Burger King. I like them. So, and I'm like, my dream is Beyond Bacon. Like if they can do bacon, we're done. It's over. And so you have this thesis. You had this tweet where you talked about it. I was not aware you were big on the Beyond Meat train. And Beyond, just to be clear, that for the people who are interested in this, like on a financial side, why don't you just tell them the potential market for Beyond Meat or for plant-based meat or alternative meats? Can you just go? Yeah. Let's start with that. How big is this market?
Yeah. In fact, if you want to go to slide 6, I have it pulled up here.
Okay, hang on a second. I gotta figure out how I'm doing that. Let's see. Share screen. Okay, I think this is gonna work. Okay, So I think people are seeing this.
Yeah, we can see your email, but that's yeah.
Okay. So so what page?
If you scroll down to page 6, so yeah, there you go, that one right there.
Okay.
So this is a chart that I pulled. It was actually researched from Barclays, and this is basically just sizing up the market, right? What's the total addressable market that Beyond Meat is trying to attack? So the global meat market in general, aggregate, generates $1.4 trillion of revenue per year. 1.4 trillion. This is comparable to the entire global auto industry. They are roughly the same size in terms of total sales per year. So right off the bat, in my view, Beyond Meat is attacking a total addressable market comparable to that of Tesla in terms of just auto sales alone. Not talking about robotaxis, that's a whole another animal, but purely based on the total market of how much meat is sold globally. And as of today, 1% of that, or slightly less than that actually, is penetrated in terms of how much plant-based meat is actually sold globally. And Barclays is estimating, this is kind of close to what my estimate is too, which is that by 2029, by the end of this decade, the market share for plant-based meats will grow to 10%. So that represents a $140 billion opportunity. And
that's revenue, right? That's not profit, that's revenue.
Revenue, correct.
Okay, so there's this number seems low to me. Okay, because let's say by 2029 there's about 8 billion people on the planet. Okay, and now maybe this is because I'm a wealthy Westerner. I'm like, well, if the average person spends $1,000 a year on meat, it's a much bigger market. But of course, the average person in the world does not spend $1,000 a year on meat. But it still seems like the average would probably be $100 a year on meat. And isn't that? I guess that does work out. So that would be like $800 billion and 10%. Okay, that's in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Is my math working?
Yeah. No, I think I mean that's a pretty good ballpark number, and so this kind of sizes up how much of an opportunity there is for Beyond Meat to attack, right?
Okay.
If 10% market share equals 140 billion.
Okay.
The market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me just, I'm going to stop the share for a second. We're going to come back to it in a second. So what I see is, right. So for people who don't understand this right now, if you want to buy a Beyond Burger in the store, it's going to cost more than a comparable regular burger patty. Let's say you're going to buy a patty, or you're going to buy a pound of Beyond Meat burger meat, or chicken. They have chicken tenders. They have a whole bunch of different things. Right now, it costs more. The reason that, maybe I'll let you, Mayur, explain this. Ultimately, Beyond Meat should cost less than regular meat. And do I need to go to a slide to explain that to people? Where would I show them that?
I mean, there's a quote on the very next slide by Ethan Brown, the CEO, which tells basically in one sentence what the strategy of the company is to usurp as much market share as possible of that 1.4 trillion market.
Okay,
and
you
he
can see
basically
this.
said, yeah.
If you get the taste right, you deliver superior nutrition, you underprice. So, but how can they get, so this is my question. How can they get the price down?
Yeah, it's simply a function of economies of scale. That's all it is.
No, but there's something else. So I'm sorry for interrupting you. Let me just, it's not just economies of scale. It's, so for people who aren't aware of this, when farmers farm cattle or pigs or chicken or whatever, they use a lot of land, they use a lot of energy, and they use a lot of water. And the key distinction that both, this is Beyond Meat, Ethan Brown, and that we were looking at before, and the CEO of Impossible Foods, I forget, I think it's also an Ethan something or other, or maybe it's a Brown, something Brown. They both talk about the fact that they use much less land, they use much less energy, and they use much less water. So in theory, at least, the cost of all those inputs is lower. And I'm not talking about like they use half the land or half the water or half the energy. It's like 1% or 5%.
Yeah.
So the cost of the inputs should be so much lower that they should be able to deliver their meat at a much lower price. So can you talk about that? Is there a slide that will help show that?
Yeah, there's a slide. It's slide 24, actually.
Okay, give me a second.
And this is actually directly off of their website as well. It sums up, exactly what the savings are in terms of, natural resources. And yep, there it is. So yeah, 99% less water and 93% less land and 90% fewer greenhouse gas emissions, 46% less energy.
Okay, the greenhouse gas emissions, just for people who don't know this, cows fart a lot and their farts contain methane. And methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. I think it's not just CO2, it's actually the methane from cows in particular is really bad for in terms of greenhouse gases. So using less land, much less capital intensive, using less water, much lower operating costs, using less energy, much lower operating costs. So it should cost a lot less. Why doesn't it cost less already?
So that's how much it requires per unit, right? This is on a per unit basis, because they have a fixed cost, which is one entire manufacturing facility. And based on how much output each factory is able to produce, they compare that to how much land and water would be required to produce that same amount of animal-based protein. So now what they have to do is take this model and continue to expand it, to scale it. And that's what they've been working on, is scaling.
Well, so we're Tesla fans, and Tesla started off making the Roadster, and then they went higher volume with the Model S, and then they went really high volume with the Model 3 and now the Model Y, and then there's this future vehicle coming, and they're constantly working on, okay, if we innovate this way, we can lower the cost, we can increase our margins. If we innovate this way, they keep finding innovations that lower cost, improve the quality of the product. So, but it's easier for us to grasp that with a car, right? And it's, the best part is no part, the best process is no process. So actually, just really quick, Ethan Brown talks about this. People say, well, I don't want my food processed. I don't want to eat processed food. All food is processed. Here's for people who think that their meat is unprocessed, here's the process. They take a cow, they have it walk on a field, and it chews up grass. It chews up plant matter. It takes it into its stomach. It processes that through its body to convert it into meat. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens before that steak ends up or the burger ends up on your plate. It goes through a process. They're processing the plants with a different process that uses less water, less land, emits fewer greenhouse gases, uses less energy. And because of the magic of chemistry and biology and engineering, they are able to make something that really, my personal opinion, Beyond Burger, Impossible Whopper, I think they're just as good as a regular burger, and in a nutritional way, they're better. Can you talk about that for a second? What's the nutritional advantage? And should I pull up a slide for that?
Yeah, there's a slide for that as well. So that's one of the common criticisms, like you mentioned, which is that, people say that these products are super processed and therefore not good for you. There's a couple of direct research studies that have looked at this and have found that the consumption of plant-based meats basically reduce, and I believe it's slide 15 there.
I'm on 15 already. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so there was a Stanford research study. It was a scientific study that was conducted. It was funded by Beyond Meat, so full disclosure on that. But they didn't control the inputs and the conclusions of the research. But basically, they found that there was a test group which consumed a fixed amount of animal-based meat, and a secondary group that consumed the same amount in terms of grams of protein, but from plant-based meat produced by Beyond Meat. And they found that the plant-based group had lower cardiovascular risk factors versus the red meat diet group. And so there's one factor called TMAO, which is linked to cardiovascular disease. That was reduced, blood cholesterol was reduced, blood pressure was reduced, and people lost weight. And to go with that, there were absolutely no adverse effects on the group that had plant-based meats.
Right, and I'm just going to add to that, and this was from the Impossible Foods guy. No, this was from a lab-based meat guy. When cows produce your meat, when animals produce your meat, there's feces involved. The farmers give them antibiotics. there's a lot of unclean things that happen from the point that the grass grows to the point that the burger's on your table. There's a lot of unclean things in the process. There's blood, there's feces, there's urine, there's antibiotics, there's parasites, there's all kinds of crazy things that happen in that process. If you take peas and you put them through the manufacturing process that Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods uses, or if you do lab-based meat, which is something we might talk about, where they basically clone animal cells, then you eliminate a lot of the uncleanliness in the process. You actually, I mean, we eliminate the problem of animal-based farming contributes to antibiotic resistance, and you don't need to use antibiotics in this process either. So there's a lot of benefits to this that, like, I mean, I love this. I actually was, I was getting ready for this, and I just actually, like, I think I clipped a coupon at my local grocery store to go buy some Beyond Italian sausage or something. I'm like, excited. You know what? I got to try this again. I got to try this at home. So I'm excited. Even if, like, there's this question, like, if it costs a little more, well, I'm not poor. I can afford to spend a little more. And if it's healthier, it's worth it. And you know, then the back of my head, you know, I'm not that much of an environmentalist. I like the environment. I want things to be better. But just that little bit, like if I'm helping the environment just a little bit, all right, I'll pay a little bit more for that. Right. So I think there's tremendous benefits to this. But for me, the challenge comes down to, and I'm going to ask you about this again, because I don't think we got there. How do they, you know, it doesn't cost, it's not cost competitive with meat yet. Now, you said something to me that Ethan Brown, the CEO of Beyond Meat, said that their target is to get cost competitive. You know, like we talk about Tesla, like the Model 3 costs more than a Toyota Camry. Now, in the long run, when you take into account total cost of ownership, but if you take into account the cost of heart surgery, right, then the total cost of Beyond Meat is less than the cost of regular meat.
Right.
Same thing with the Model 3, total cost of ownership is really less than a Camry. But to get the face cost, the cost to buy it up front, if we can get Model 3 down the same price as a Camry, then that obliterates the Camry because it's a better car in every other way. So Ethan Brown said, was it 2024? Their goal is to get the cost of their meat to be at parity with 80% ground beef.
Exactly. That's right.
80% lean ground beef. Yeah.
Right. That's their goal, is to get it to price parity by 2024.
So how do they get, I mean, I have some thoughts on this, but what's your take on how they get there?
So one thing is that they're still iterating, by the way. So this is not a company that's fixed. They haven't just created a burger and here you go, everybody go to town on it. They're continuously iterating on the recipe itself. So there was the original Beyond Burger, which came out, back in 2012, I believe. And then they iterated it again to Beyond 2.0. And now they actually just launched Beyond 3.0. And so at each stage of their development cycle, they've gotten closer and closer and closer to replicating the taste and texture of meat. So the first thing that they have to do is get the recipe right? So before they can even invest in manufacturing scale, they want to be able to get to that point where the vast majority of people that try their burgers are unable to tell the difference between the Beyond Burger and an actual beef burger. So that's step number one. And so they actually employ over 200 scientists. That's a part of their R&D budget.
That's Manhattan Beach, California, right?
Right, exactly. Yep. So that's their facility there. They have an entire R&D and test kitchen there. So that's step number one, is to actually innovate to the point where they get to that level of indistinguishability between the plant-based meat and actual meat. Once they get to that point, then it's all about investing in manufacturing scale and to do it in mass, basically. So they've already started to do that because sales are hitting their stride. They've compounded revenue at about 75% over the past 5 years. So it's incredible growth.
Let's just touch on that for a second. So Beyond Meat has been a fast-growing company, but COVID threw a wrench in there. I just listened to their. If you're interested in this, by the way, you go to investor relations for. If you Google IR Beyond Meat, you'll get to their investor relations page, and they just had their earnings call like yesterday. So I actually listened to the earnings call. I couldn't listen to the whole thing. I'm sorry, it was boring as pace, some of it, but I listened to some of the earnings call. I looked at their numbers. They got hit by COVID because a lot of their product goes to restaurants, and a lot of restaurants were very limited because of COVID. So, but I think they've resumed their growth, right?
So they've resumed their growth. In fact, their food service business got hit by COVID, which is the channel which they sell through restaurants. Yeah. However, their retail sales actually made up for that. So they actually grew year over year, even though the pandemic hit. So 2020 overall was actually another growth year versus 2019 for Beyond Meat. So that was another interesting thing that they did. And now the growth is expected to resume for the food service side of things as well through the restaurant.
So the theory is, and I'm going to push back on you for a second on this, but the theory is that they need to get the product right and then they can scale. And my concern is when you talk about the 200 research scientists, what I heard in the investor call that I find irritating is they keep rolling out different products. Yes, they came out with Beyond Burger 3.0, but they also came out with a chicken tender product. And they got an Italian sausage product. And to me, it's like, get one right and scale that and then get the next one right. And maybe it makes sense. Look, we're trying to get 20 products right. I worry that the effort to maybe there's some cross train.
Yeah, I was going to say
getting one product right. When you get one product right, it helps you learn how to get the other product right. But I'm torn by the fact that it seems like they're trying to put out too many different products. And is that the right path? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. There isn't a significant difference in the skill set of scientists that are working on this when it comes to the burger versus the sausage, versus the chicken tenders that they just launched.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of connection between those different projects that they're working on. I think Ethan Brown just believes that they have the capability to do it all simultaneously. And by the way, they actually did do that too, because Beyond Meat actually did make chicken strips way back when they first started.
Yeah. And
they sunsetted that product. Why? Because they wanted to focus all of their resources on the Beyond Burger, which is their biggest revenue driver. So anyway, now that they've gotten to the point where they're comfortable with the Beyond Burger 3.0, they've now launched, the newest iteration of their chicken tenders based on the newest findings and the newest approach that they have perfected with the Beyond Burger.
You think I can try that at Chick-fil-A? Where am I going to get a chicken tender at a restaurant?
It just launched, so it's not yet in a wide number of stores. I think they did it a couple of test runs at KFC. But it's still only a few locations. It's not nationwide yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is there something else on the slide you want me to show?
You can just show slide 4 just gives you a quick look at their, how fast they've compounded revenue. And, the green bars show the estimates. So you go all the way, there you go. Yep. So this is a 5-year CAGR of 75%. So this is a rapidly growing company. Obviously, 2021 and 2022 are my estimates.
Okay, let me just hold you for a second. So, market cap is something like $7 or $8 billion.
Yeah.
And if they capture 10% of the global meat market, then that's $140 billion in sales. The price to sales ratio of 5.
Right.
The market cap is like 800 billion, 700 billion.
I don't think that they're going to capture 100% of the plant-based meat market because there is competition, right? There is Impossible.
Yeah.
And there's also other brands too, like there's Raised and Rooted.
No, we'll talk about the competition for a second. But anyway, the point is that if they can get a significant percentage of a $140 billion market, I think you said, then they could go from 8 billion to 80 billion.
Yeah. And Ethan Brown has said that himself.
Yeah.
He thinks that Beyond Meat will be at least a $40 billion revenue company by 2030.
Okay, your projection here is they're going to get close to $1 billion in revenue in 2022.
Right.
Okay. So
it's slightly above 800 million, but yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying they're growing, they're getting closer, and now if they get the price down to competitive with 80% lean ground beef, let's say, as an example. Isn't it like now the revenue's lower? So, you've got to really increase the scale, the amount of, now, of course, you've got to really ramp up production. And one of the things I was going to ask you about, and I don't know if this is in your slides, is in the earnings call, they talked about opening a factory in Europe and a factory in China. Is that in the slides?
I don't have that in the slides, no, but that's a huge part of their, growth plans. Is China is a huge market for them, and they've actually gotten a lot of really good reception in China.
They have a pork product, I think, that they're doing in China.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, but this relates to, I love relating things back to Tesla. Elon Musk talked about, look, if we have the factory where the customer is, then we don't have to ship the product as far. And if we have the supply chain where the factory is, then move the molecules the shortest distance, and you're reducing costs. And then if you can go from getting the stuff from the supplier to getting it to the computer fast enough, you get paid before you had to pay your suppliers. And right. That's a good model. So I think one of the questions I have is, we're looking at Giga Texas right now. And I'm looking at Giga Texas and I'm thinking, that thing is unbelievably huge. And they're developing faster production processes. So if it's, 5 times the size of Fremont, it's not going to produce 5 times the number of vehicles of Fremont. It's going to produce 25 times the number of vehicles of Fremont, maybe.
Yeah.
Does it look like Beyond has the potential to innovate like that, build a larger factory, build a higher velocity production process? Do you think they have all that potential?
Well, I think if anybody has it, it's them. Okay. They are the market share leader. They're the dominant player within plant-based, meats. So if anyone can do it, it's them.
Well, let's talk about the competition. So when I was looking at this before, and if people go on YouTube, if you go on my channel, I have a video called Beyond Impossible, where I talk about both Beyond Meats and Impossible Foods. And at the time I made that video, I wasn't aware of lab-based meats, which I'll talk about. Kimball Musk is involved with a company called Memphis Meats, which is a lab-based meat company. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I thought Impossible Foods was doing really well. Aren't they also growing? Aren't they also competitive? Don't they also have products in stores and restaurants?
Yeah, they do. They do. I haven't seen their financials though, because they're still a private company.
Right.
So we don't really know exactly what their revenues are. I don't think they've actually posted an S1 filing yet. I could be mistaken, but
there were rumors that they were going to IPO, but they haven't, I haven't seen any hint of an IPO in them. Have you?
Right. I've heard chatter about it. I think they're working on it. So as soon as they do, they will release their S1 filing, which will show all of their financials finally.
But is the theory, is there almost a theory that maybe Impossible Foods is making the right call by not being exposed to the pressure of public markets? They're able to innovate more and not worry about the pressure of public shareholders and shorts and all that stuff. Is it possible they're taking a smarter path?
It could be, but I think it requires a certain level of being cerebral. Like if you look at Ethan Brown, you never hear a peep out of him, like in terms of like him acknowledging the shorts. And by the way, there's a lot of shorts that are attacking Beyond Meat. A lot of them are former Tesla Q people who are now shorting Beyond Meat. Ethan Brown doesn't care.
Hey, listen, Tesla people, this is the same battle. This is the same battle. And I don't limit it to Beyond Meat. I think Impossible Foods, some of the lab-based meats, I don't know if anybody else is publicly traded, but the same people who hate Tesla for saving energy and saving the environment and doing things the right way and upending industries and making the world a better place, better nutrition, all that other stuff, the same interests that attacked Tesla and still attack Tesla, they're attacking Beyond Meat. They're attacking, they want to attack Impossible Foods and the other. They're spreading the propaganda, the FUD, that this stuff is bad in some way, right? Am I right?
No, you're right. I think you're right. A lot of people are talking about how this is fake meat, or it's so heavily processed that it's not actually good for you, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, I think the more that the research comes out on the benefits of plant-based meat versus red meat, I think it's going to be a no-brainer, right? And that's how you think about investments in general, like from first principles thinking. What is the size of the opportunity, and why should Beyond Meat grab a significant share of that market, right? If there's a fundamental problem that the company is solving, or if they're pushing costs down for people, Or if they've built a brand that people love, or if they have the best products, right? These are all reasons why a company should usurp market share.
Okay,
And I think that's what Beyond Meat is doing.
so what do you know about lab-based meat? Or what can you tell the audience about lab? And I can talk about it too, but I'll give you a shot first.
Yeah, so there's a company called Just Foods, right? Another, California startup. They're working on cultured meat, lab-grown meat. So this is actual animal protein, right? Animal-driven protein that will essentially replicate and grow, meat in a petri dish in a lab.
It's almost like they're cloning the cells.
Exactly. Yeah, that's essentially what they're trying to do. And they've launched this in Singapore, actually. I think Singapore has become the first domicile to approve and allow the sale of cultured meat. So it's out there, right? So that's coming. I still have a question about whether cultured meat will be the solution that people necessarily go with over and above plant-based meat. Mainly because, just again, from first principles thinking, what do people want, right? People want a good tasting burger, right? People want sausage, people want pork, right? So
you're making me hungry, but yes.
Right. And so like if something that Beyond Meat or even Impossible makes is tasty and people actually want it, right? And if they like it and if it actually helps with, if it has health benefits and environmental benefits, and it has the similar, in terms of price, if it hits price parity, why should someone choose a cultured meat product over a Beyond Burger or an Impossible Burger?
Well, but suppose the cultured meat approach ends up costing less.
Then that's a good thing. Then that's something that we should pay attention to.
The plant-based meat requires farming. The cultured-based meat, I don't know what nutrients they use to feed the basically, just to be, I'm not sure it's clear to people. The lab-based meat, the idea is they take animal cells, they take cells from a burger or a cow or whatever, and they have this method in the lab of replicating the cells and growing it into a burger or growing it into a steak or growing fish cells into sashimi. There's different things that they're doing. And the way I see it, by the way, it's not necessarily the case that lab-based meats win everything or plant-based meats win everything. It might be that, for sashimi, the lab-based meat's the best approach, and for burgers, the plant-based meat's the best approach. And different and Beyond Meat might win burgers, and Impossible Foods might win steaks, and somebody else might come along and win bacon. And I just want to be clear, anybody out there who's working on this, please make a bacon. I'm just saying, because bacon's really high price. I don't know if you've seen the price of bacon. Bacon's gone through the roof. That's bacon. The price of bacon has gone to the moon. So if we can get like plant-based bacon or lab-based bacon, and you can really, that's like when the comical thing is I order the Beyond Burger at BurgerFi and I get bacon added, right? Because I just like bacon that much. So, but I see that, and that goes to your point that they don't have to capture all 140 billion of the plant-based or alternative meat market. Because you said 10% of the market might be plant-based meat, but it could be 10% of the market is alternative meat. Can we lump them both in as an alternative meat, or is there some other category that we're confusing it with? I've even seen hybrid meat.
Yeah. No, I think it's plant-based. Oh, I think it's alternative meats is what they're going for. So a part of that could be cultured meat, right? Cell-based meat. But yeah, I think that's also another viable, potential outcome where 50% is cultured, 50% is plant-based. So ultimately, it just matters about taste, texture, aroma, health, and cost.
My biggest concern, so what I see as the biggest threat to Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods is, what if cultured meat just ends up costing less? Because most of the benefits are the same. I think the cholesterol benefit is probably better with the plant-based meat versus the lab-based meat. I'm not 100% sure that. I know that the guy I saw who was talking about lab-based meat, he was saying all the great health benefits of lab-based meat. It felt like I was watching the same story, but from a different process. But it just seems like maybe they can get there. But the other story is Beyond Meat's there, right? I think beyond is Beyond Meat, other than Impossible Foods, is anybody else producing in significant volume yet?
Nope. Nobody else has significant volume like Beyond Meat.
Mhm.
Impossible is number two. So yeah, no one has the volume that these guys do. And I think the other limiting factor for lab-based meat is time. I think it does take a pretty significant amount of time to actually allow the culture to grow, to a point where it's ready for packaging and whatnot. Whereas with the Beyond Meat Impossible approach is actual manufacturing. So their production is a function of how quickly can they actually manufacture it. Whereas this, it's I'm not sure of the science, but I think it's culturing, developing the culture can only go so fast, right?
I'm just assuming they feed glucose. They just like feed a glucose solution. I mean, I'm sure it's more complicated than this, but they just put a glucose solution in with the cells, and they put some other things in there to get the some other stimulus to get the cells to multiply.
Yeah. And I mean, if we're talking about costs, I mean, right now, cell-based meat is significantly more expensive. Right now, Beyond Meat, if you buy a pound of their Beyond Beef, I think you can get it for like about $8 at most grocery stores, at least in the US. I think it's more expensive in Europe right now, and that's why they're setting up local production.
Right.
But for $8, that's about, I think that's close to what beef would cost if you buy like the organic grass-fed sort of higher end beef.
All right, so
Beyond is already at price parity with organic meats as it is right now.
Oh, it's price parity with organics, but it's not at price parity with So because I go to the grocery, I live near a fresh market, and on Tuesdays, fresh market has ground beef and chicken, boneless chicken breasts. I think it's boneless, skinless chicken breasts for $2.99 a pound. Mm-hmm. And fresh market is generally speaking good quality. It's sort of like it's not quite, it's in the ballpark of a Whole Foods level quality. That feeling that you're getting quality food. So I've always felt that, that's a big jump to get from $8 a pound down to $2.99 a pound. Price parity. I don't know that they're going to get to $2.99 a pound in 2024, right? And Fresh Market is not the cheapest store around. If you're really hunting for a deal, you might be able to get a lower price on ground beef. So, and then you're like, okay, I live in an expensive part of the United States. There's probably places in the United States where the cost of ground beef is even less. And then there's places in the world where meat costs even less. Right. So I think, right. I mean, I'm going to guess in Egypt, meat costs less per pound than it costs in the US. I don't know. Or I'm guessing I'm going to guess from your name. Are you from somewhere in India? Or your family's from somewhere in India?
Yeah, from India. Yep.
I have no idea what meat costs in India, but I know people are very poor. The average consumer in India has got a lot less money than an American.
Right.
So I'm not sure what they eat. I'm going to guess they eat a lot of chicken. Does chicken cost a lot less per pound in India than it costs here?
You know what? I'm not sure actually, because I mean, India is a different case a little bit because India has a significant vegetarian population as well.
Sure.
So, but I mean, yeah, chicken. I'm not sure of the pricing there, but yeah, I in general I'd agree that it is relatively affordable for people to consume that there. In terms of their local income.
I'm just saying in general, whether it's Venezuela. Venezuela is a bad example, but you go to Costa Rica or Panama, they're probably paying less for meat there per pound because the consumers just can't afford it, and and then the farmers, the farmers who are raising the cattle are getting paid a lot less. I don't know, and maybe I'm wrong about that. Mm-hmm. So, all right, so let's go. Is there anything else you want people to see on the slides?
I mean, I just think that in general, the key, sort of takeaway, right? If you go to the second, or the second to last slide, actually, it's kind of a good, interesting, right, parallel that I see with, with Tesla, for example.
Yeah. All right, we're there.
And yeah, so it's right there. So there's a couple of similarities that I just see with Tesla. I just wanted to mention this. So they're both led by owner operators, right? They're both significant shareholders of their respective companies. And so they're, obviously that's another interesting sort of investment strategy too, when you're investing in a company who's, led by whose CEO is also a significant, or if not the number one shareholder of the company. who himself founded it. That's also a really cool thing to see. They're both attacking, massive and deeply embedded industries. They're both aiming to reduce dramatically greenhouse gas emissions, right? Because of the respective industries' contribution.
And otherwise help the environment. It's not just greenhouse gases. There's a
You're
lot
right,
of
exactly.
there's a lot of pollution that comes from, say, chicken farms and pork and pig farms that
Yeah.
pollutes the water and all this other stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yep. They're both building economies of scale, right? So that they can get unit costs low enough to make the products affordable for consumers, right? Rapid market share growth, extremely early in the S curve, the adoption S curve. And, also from a financial standpoint, I'm a finance nerd. So one thing that you have to see that you had to look at in terms of Tesla's finances is to make the appropriate analytical adjustments, because any company that's growing rapidly, they're achieving that growth because they have significant investments that they have to make in R&D and CapEx. And what that does is that it hits the P&L when those, the expenses are made, right? And they don't immediately contribute to revenues, right? It takes some time for those investments to bear its fruit. And so that's why it looks like these companies perennially lose money in the early years. But then once they get to a certain scale and get unit costs down low enough, and then when they have operating leverage, that's when, profitability starts to flow through.
All right, let me just see if there's any. Okay, I wanted to ask you about return on invested capital, because this is a thing I think you love to talk about. Am I right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to slide number 18, which is where I think you start talking about return on invested capital. Does that sound right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so can you explain what return on invested capital is and why people should care about it?
Yeah. So I've often said on my Twitter and elsewhere, I think return on invested capital is the most important number in finance, period. What this is essentially what is the rate of return a business generates per dollar of capital that investors have given it, right? So the easiest way to explain this is, for example, a bank account, right? There's two bank accounts. One pays you 0% interest and another pays you 1% interest. All things held equal, the 1% bank account is the better one to go with, right? Because you're earning at least some return versus nothing. ROIC is the same exact concept. It's the return that the company generates on its total asset base or its total capital base. So let's say if investors provided a company with $10 billion, they deploy that in hiring, engineers, scientists, build factories and whatnot. And then the return that they generate is their net profit, right? So on the $10 billion, if they generate $1 billion in net profit, that's a 10% ROIC, right? So what this tells you is that when a company, continuously and consistently generates high ROIC, it indicates the presence of a moat, right? And why is that? It's because they're earning such high returns on capital that whatever they're doing would attract the attention from competitors.
Well, let me just try to put this in a Tesla context, because a lot of our viewers are Tesla fans. Mm-hmm. Tesla builds a factory in Shanghai for, let's say, $2 billion. And in its first full year of running at full steam, it produces $2 billion in profit, right? It generates, I don't know if you said that example or somebody else said that example. So it basically generates enough profit in its first year to pay for the cost of the factory. And then it keeps producing that much profit or produces more in future years. That's a really high return on invested capital compared to I put money in a bank account and it pays me 1% interest. Or even I invest in a company that returns. People will invest and be thrilled to get a 10% return on capital, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
and so,
exactly.
And with Tesla, we're looking at maybe 100% return on invested capital in that narrow context of we built a factory and this is what it's producing, not necessarily overall Tesla's return on invested capital. But so should we go to the next slide or
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the general calculation of how to come up with this. Basically, net operating profit after tax divided by total long-term assets plus net working capital, right? So not to get too much into the weeds of finance, but basically this is telling you, what is your operating profit after tax, right? So that's on the P&L statement relative to the total long-term assets that you have on your balance sheet, plus your net working capital. So what's net working capital? It's just your current assets minus the non-debt portion of your current liabilities, right? That's your net working capital. And you can see that reported on the cash flow statement as well. This is a part of cash flow generation, changes in net working capital.
Okay, and you used the term on here, multi-baggers. Multi-baggers is something that goes up, I'm guessing, more than 3x?
Yeah, well, more than 1x, so more than double, basically
Right.
doubling.
More than 2x, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a study that there's a book called 100 Baggers, which I read. It's a great book. But basically they found that, the majority of companies that multiply in terms of, their, the stock price, they are companies that have not just high growth, but also high ROIC, right? Right.
Okay.
The reason for that is because you want to have as high of an ROIC as possible, because then what happens is if you have an average ROIC, then one day, let's say, for example, Tesla or Beyond Meat, let's say Tesla has an average ROIC, but still has a 50% growth rate, right? It'll still do really well, right? But the day that that growth starts to taper to say 40%, 30%, 10%, 5%, it'll command a multiple, right? A PE multiple that's just the same as the industry average. So right now, Ford and GM trade, their PE multiples are around, 10 to 12 times earnings, which is very low. Tesla is at, 150 times earnings because they have both the growth rate and presence of really high ROIC. But if their ROIC was low, then once they hit maturity, right? Once that growth rate tapers to the industry average, they will also have an industry average PE ratio.
Okay.
Companies that have a high ROIC permanently always have a permanently higher multiple, in the end, even when their growth tapers. So this has been shown by multiple studies, by Credit Suisse and others. So this is why ROIC, in my view, is the most important thing. Growth is great. Obviously, we want high growth, and we're seeing high growth, but growth will ultimately taper at some point, right? Companies will eventually become so mature that they can't really grow, beyond that point. That's when ROIC starts to become, the most important factor.
So let's talk about Beyond Meat's ROIC, return on invested capital. They're unprofitable, so they don't have a positive ROIC, but you've got this gross profit comparison.
Exactly. Yeah. So we can switch this a little bit for early stage companies that don't yet have profitability on the bottom line. We can replace the numerator with gross profit, and we keep the denominator the same. So what does that look like, right, for Beyond Meat? So if you go to the next slide, I just have a little screenshot of, just an Excel sheet. Basically, you can just see a little, blurb here where it shows revenue, gross profit, EBITDA. And then you'll see I highlighted below that invested capital, and then the gross profit per dollar of invested capital there. And that's at about 17%. I haven't filled in the Q2 numbers just yet. So as of Q1 of 2021, it was about 17%. Now that's actually come down significantly. It was at over 30% just prior to the pandemic. So the pandemic obviously is still having a big effect on their financials right now, because their restaurant business is down so much, and that's where their margins are at. I think that's going to come back to 30% plus. So let's put that into context. Like, okay, 30% pre-pandemic, 17% right now. How does that stack up to the competition, right? And so if we go to the next slide, I show a slide of Beyond Meat versus Tyson using the same exact calculation over the last 2 years. And you can see the difference in the numbers here. So pre-pandemic, Beyond Meat was significantly higher than Tyson. Post-pandemic, it's really gone down, but it's still in excess of Tyson. And Tyson obviously is the biggest meat maker in the US, at least.
Right.
So this tells me that, look, right now, obviously Beyond Meat got really crushed with the pandemic because they have a huge reliance on the restaurants. Whereas Tyson, being a much more mature business, they don't have as much of a reliance on restaurants as they do just grocery retail sales.
Yeah, let me just touch on the restaurant thing, just so people understand that there are restaurants that curate food for their consumers. That to some extent, there's like, hey, listen, we've got this new thing we want you to try. When you go to the grocery store, nobody's like, hey, you should try this new thing. Unless you're going to Whole Foods, maybe. Most grocery stores, you walk in, you find what you want, and you buy it. When you walk into a restaurant, the waiter might say, let's say you're at a sit-down restaurant, hey, we've got this new meat. A lot of people like it. You should try it. You go to BurgerFi or Burger King, you see it on the menu, it's featured. You might ask somebody about it. I don't know. I mean, beyond BurgerFi, some of the chains, I don't think Burger King necessarily the staff are that good at curating, providing curation, but like BurgerFi, they'll talk to you about it and say, yeah, this is pretty cool. And if you can get the restaurant staff to say, hey, this is pretty cool, you should try it, then you might sell more meat, and you're able to charge a higher price for the meat, and the restaurant will charge a higher price for the burger. And that's why they make higher margins on restaurant. Am I on the ballpark correct there, Mayur?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Yep. Okay. And yeah, so that's what they've been reliant on in terms of their margins, right? Making those margins work. My bet is that this number is going to rebound by the end of this year, assuming we don't get a new sort of wave of lockdowns from COVID. But I think that's what's going to happen, right? And that tells you basically the potential ROIC. That's not ROIC because, again, we're using gross profit, which is way higher up on the P&L. But that tells you what the potential is for Beyond Meat to generate in terms of ROIC.
As they scale, and we've seen this with Tesla, as Tesla scales, the administrative costs of running the overall operation become less as share of the business, and that allows the company to make more profit. And then we've got the same thing with them opening a factory in China, them opening a factory in Europe that allows them to scale the business. It allows them to reduce costs, lower costs in supply chain, get lower costs in shipping products to consumers. All these things should play in their favor. So this all sounds good. I had something in my head I was going to ask you, and it slipped my mind. So let me just see. I just want to check the chat really quick to see if anybody's asking questions. I don't see anything. All right. Anything else you want me to show on the slides?
I think that's just basically, the synopsis of my bull thesis. I mean, the last slide you can show is just my final thoughts that sums that up. The idea is that this is
what number are we looking at?
The very last slide, 34.
Okay. Sorry for people seeing the screen blaring by. I probably should have done this before I shared the screen. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, basically the future that I'm betting on is that, if you can basically recreate the taste and texture of beef and chicken, and source it purely from plants that improve health, reduce environmental damage, cost the same, and save animals, why wouldn't it win, right?
Yeah.
So that's the whole goal that Ethan Brown is trying to been working on is, our goal is to first master the taste, texture, and aroma of meat using plant-based sources, and then ultimately achieve cost parity, with what, is already available right now. So this could be another thing in terms of, an effect on the macroeconomy too, because this is fundamentally deflationary, right? We talk about inflation all the time, right? Especially with food.
That's a Kathy Wood thing. Yes.
Yeah. I think this is deflationary. I think this is a technology applied to food in a way that we have never seen before, at a scale that we've never seen before. Because we're fundamentally changing how we get our protein, right? Rather than requiring this entire massive apparatus of raising, millions and millions of livestock on farms all over the world that generate greenhouse gases and all this waste. There's also the ethical argument too. This is a passion of mine personally, is just animal rights, but not to get into that too much. I know it's a touchy subject, but why not? If we can, generate the same exact taste and get the same nutrition, ultimately, reduce the negative impacts of meat on our health, why wouldn't it win? And that's the why behind the entire thing. Beyond Meat generated $146 million in revenue just this past quarter. The TAM, as we saw, is 1.4 trillion. there has to be a why. Right now it's grown 75% per year, but there has to be a why behind why it should continue to grow into that $140 billion, market.
So
And the why is that, in my view, we're solving a major pain point, and doing it without necessarily giving up on a whole lot, which is taste and texture.
okay, so I've got a couple of questions here that I like. So Digital Blade says, why does all the plant-based food have to be fried or baked to taste okay? And I don't know if that's true. Do you have a sense of that?
No, I mean, you can just grill the, you don't have to fry,
yeah,
or
you can grill the burgers.
You can grill the Beyond Burger, yeah.
Yeah.
And Impossible Burger.
And Philip asks, what is your share price target for this year? And I'm going to guess that it's hard to call a share price when you're still not profitable yet, you're still growing and they're getting shorted. But do you have a sense of do you have a time frame where you feel comfortable making a share price target that you think it should get to?
I usually abstain from short-term price targets because I have absolutely no idea. So I'm not even going to try. If you want that info, I'm not the guy to ask for that.
Looking out 2-3 years.
Two to 3 years. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, if we continue to see market share growth, we continue to see growth in revenue. I think they can continue to trade at around 8 to 10 times sales, 3 to 4 years out from now, on a tripling of their revenue from this year. So I think in terms of their current share count, by 2024, if they do achieve that goal of hitting price parity with beef by 2024, I think this is a $30 billion market cap company by 2024. So that represents roughly a 4x from where it is right now.
Okay, and we still have the issue of the shorts tend to cling. The FUD and the shorts tend to cling. And we've seen this with Tesla, that somebody has a great idea and it gets slowed up by different things like that. This is an interesting question. Can pet food be done with plant-based meat?
That's an interesting idea. I never thought of that.
Because the dogs and cats might not be as picky.
Yeah. Yeah.
They might be able to eat burger 1.0.
Yeah. That's a great idea. I think we should pitch that. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you about this. We've seen they're expanding to China. They're expanding to Europe. Everybody wants Tesla to open. Not everybody. A lot of people want Tesla to open Giga India. Do you think that it would make sense for them to expand to India? Are there other countries besides India that, India is such a huge country in terms of population, not a wealthy country, but a huge country. Are there other countries that you think are potential targets for them?
Yeah, India would be interesting. I think people would like it in India. Now, a lot of people, in India, like the majority of the country is vegetarian. I believe it is above 50%.
But that's still like 600 million people.
Yeah, it's still a lot of people, exactly, that still eat meat. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a great idea for, to test this in India. I think people would be open to it. And by the way, you can buy this raw, you can buy raw beef and it basically takes on the flavor of your cooking. So, obviously India has its own culinary approach, but you can incorporate any of this stuff into, a masala, any masala that you want to use. And it's great.
I love masala. Charlie asked a really interesting question. I have seen something like this. Is the dairy industry ripe for disruption too? And I did just see some kind of plant-based milk. I mean, there are almond milks and other things, but I saw one that was more in this category. Have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, I don't know if you're thinking of Not Milk.
Yes, that's the one I just saw.
Yeah.
And there's somebody, I thought it's had like a sort of a coconut / pineapple flavor to it, but it was a plant-based milk.
Yeah. I think they're comparable to Beyond Meat because they've created a milk that is not like oat milk. Right now, all the rage is oat milk, right? Yeah. Everybody loves oat milk.
My daughter drinks oat milk.
Yeah, and it's great, right? But yeah, Not Milk has created a milk that's more sort of engineered the way Beyond Meat is, right? They've actually tried to recreate.
And I think the key is it feels like milk in your mouth. It's not necessarily the same flavor, and that's something they got to work on. But the feel of there's a feel when you're drinking milk.
Yeah.
Of the feel of the liquid, the texture, whatever. And I think the what I've read about it was they got the texture down. They don't have the
Right.
flavor down yet. They got the texture down.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a question whether you like coconut and pineapple, which I haven't tried it. I'm thinking about trying it. There was a question about Tattooed Chef. I think Tattooed Chef is just vegetarian burgers. Am I wrong about that? I'm not 100% familiar with. That's not really with this model. That's
just business model. Yeah, it's a slightly business model. Mm-hmm.
It doesn't taste like meat. They're making a veggie burger. They're not making a burger. They're not using vegetables to make a burger that tastes like meat. They're just making veggie burgers.
Right.
Am I right?
Yeah, and they make, I believe, prepared meals as well. Like they make meal kits. Like it's kind of like another version of like, take home, like, they supply you with the entire kit and you can cook the meal yourself.
So Easy E asked this question. I sort of had a related question. I have two related questions to this, but do you think Beyond could ever make something that tastes better than meat, or would it be better to nail meat? And what I would say is, well, what if they could emulate Wagyu, right, for the same cost as regular beef?
Right.
Because I don't think there's a reason they wouldn't be able to achieve that. Right. Or maybe it's the lab-based meat guys. It might be possible to do something like that with one of those.
Yeah.
But my related question, like I was thinking about this, like I love sushi and sashimi, and I'm a sushi snob. Like I will only eat at a few sushi places, and like if I'm in California or I'm in New York, there's a lot of good sushi places. But South Florida is kind of limited on, and there's like different grades. I'm not saying this like from an industry perspective, just my feel. Some places I go to, it's like, yeah, that's like low grade fish. Some places I go to, that's pretty good fish. And some places like, wow, that's spectacular fish. That's really fresh, really good. Like that came off the plane from Japan yesterday, right? I'm not saying that's correct. I'm just saying I have that feeling. If you get a plate of sushi and it was $7, you're getting the cheap stuff. If you get a plate of sushi and it was $70, you're getting the good stuff. And there really is a noticeable difference. Well, it seems to me that using the plant-based or cell-based approach might end up being able to generate really high quality sashimi that would normally cost $75. It'd be a lot easier to beat that price point if you targeted high-end sushi. There's certain kind of, if you targeted Wagyu beef, right? I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think, and this is the thing about Beyond Meat is I think they're just never done innovating. I think they're continuously trying to come out with new categories to enter, and that's what they're going to do. I mean, that's frankly, Ethan Brown has said that himself.
Yeah. Somebody says, do you think there's an argument that cultured meat makes sense for whole tissue meats like steak or sushi, but Beyond Meat makes more sense for ground meats?
Yeah, I think, and I think you alluded to that earlier. I think there could be cases where lab grown meat is the standard for certain categories of food, and plant-based meats can take over for the rest. That's certainly a possibility, I think.
Somebody asked, I don't know, are you vegan?
I am. Yeah.
So would you eat a Beyond Burger?
Yeah, and I do.
Okay.
I do. Yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty interesting. That because I know my neighbor Brian who watches this channel a lot. He lives over there. He and his wife have been vegan for a long time, and I don't think he would eat. I have to ask him this. I don't think he would eat a Beyond Burger. I think there's sort of like they got so used to eating vegan that they like vegan style food, and a Beyond Burger is not vegan style food. It's almost like it doesn't make sense to them. But I'll have to ask him that.
If you actually notice, like the strategy that both Beyond and Impossible have done in terms of the retail locations, the burgers are not placed in the vegan section, right? They're placed next to the meats. So that's a part of their strategies. They're trying to market themselves to meat eaters. They're really not trying to enter and remain in the niche, which is the vegan circles, because it's just not a big market to scale, right? They're not going to be able to achieve what they want to achieve just by tapping into the vegan market.
Okay, so John Yent asked this question, which is, I think, the same question. Can plant-based meat be eaten by vegetarians and vegans? And I think the answer is obviously yes.
Yeah.
365 Solve says India will be very tough Why do they have 100% tariff on EVs? I think the point would be that that Beyond Meat would build a factory in India and thus not face India does have this whole difficult regulatory market, but I got to think that's doable. I think it's yeah. So all right, let me just look. Anything? I'm looking to see if you guys have questions. Ask your questions. Let's see. So what do you say to the people? And it's hard for you as a vegan. Oh, Uber3 asked this question, and I'm not sure you can do better than I can on this. How are lab-based meats made? My impression is they take cells from an animal. They take cells from a cow that would grow. I don't know if it's that they take cells that are part of the muscle that go into the meat, or if they take stem cells. Do you know the answer to that? Are they using stem cells from animals?
There's a couple of different approaches, but yeah, I think there is a method where they use stem cells from the muscle of an animal and allow it to then cultivate in a lab. So yeah, stem cells is one approach. And there's, I think, a couple of different approaches. I'm not super familiar with the science of it, but yeah, that's pretty much what they try to do.
Okay, so Philip asks, what does Mayur think would be the biggest driver for Americans to take on plant-based meat replacements? Would it be health reasons, ethical reasons, or like I would say cost? What do you think?
First and foremost would be taste, right? And then secondly, probably equally as important.
Well, the taste point is as long as it tastes as good, then it's competitive, but they're not going to buy it unless it's cheaper and or health reasons, ethical reasons, right?
Right.
So you have to nail the taste first, and then after, assuming they nail the taste and the texture, then it's, then
they'll scale manufacturing.
Do you think it's cost? Do you think it's health? Do you think it's ethics? What do you think is a big driver after you match the quality?
It's cost after that, right? Cost is obviously the most. No one will buy, Beyond Meat if it stays at its price point of $8 to $10 per pound. It'll stay a niche product forever. I mean, right. That's just what's going to happen. The health reasons, I think, are going to be a major driver of sales once it gets to that point. Because remember, if Beyond achieves price parity, right, with beef, then all that would mean is that people are indifferent to buying beef or Beyond Meat, assuming that Beyond Meat even tastes the same as what they're used to, right? So, there has to be something that tips the scales in that favor, and that's going to be the health concern. I think people are still not as motivated by the environment. I mean, unless if it's a very small thing that they have to do. But that's just not a major selling point.
I think we need tax credits. We need plant-based meat tax credits, right? We got to get Joe Biden on board. They're talking about EV tax credits. It's the same issue, right? We're trying to save the environment, help the environment, all this other stuff. It's the same argument.
Right.
So, but so I guess there's a question there. What led to, how did the tax credit come out in the first place from a political standpoint? Was it that they didn't know Tesla was going to come along and wreck their industry, and it was actually a handout to General Motors to make EVs? Or was there a push from some environmental groups? And how do we get the environmental groups to push for plant-based meat? What do you think about that? I mean, because that would help, right? If all of a sudden they said, hey, we're giving you no sales tax on plant-based meat. I mean, that would be a really simple thing, right? A state could say, we're no longer going to allow you to charge a sales tax on plant-based meat. That would be an 8% break in Florida. You know, I don't know what the sales tax is. I don't even know where you are. You're in DC?
I'm in Maryland. Yeah.
Maryland. So that's a start. But if the government could say, hey, the thing with a car is it's easy to track. I bought a car. Tracking your plant-based meat purchases for tax credits would be trickier. I mean, I guess it would make more sense to have the government subsidize the plant-based meat companies or give them a tax break on their profits, right? Something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I have it on slide number 10, but like this is a major problem that we're facing in terms of a health crisis, right? Like there's
health too, yeah.
There's just endless research that has connected red meat consumption to a whole host of issues: colon cancer, diabetes, heart disease. There was actually a pretty wide-ranging study that was just published by the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. It was just published on July 21st of this year. The title is Red and Processed Meat Consumption Increases Risk for Heart Disease, right?
Yeah.
We've heard this before, but this is an even bigger and more conclusive study that was released, right?
Do you think that the farmers, the ranchers have outsized influence on DC, and and don't they get subsidized? Isn't there like subsidies to the animal industry?
Yeah. Farmers have a significant connection to to national politics, and this goes with both parties, right? Neither party is ever going to do anything that harms farmers.
Right. Well, it's like car dealerships. Right? Car dealers are the biggest contributors to congressmen in every district, and farmers are big contributors to congressmen in every district. Because every congressman, almost every congressman, has a farmer in their district.
Yeah.
With the exception of some really big cities. John Yen asked a question I really love. Does Beyond Meat have a longer shelf life than legacy beef? I don't know the answer to that question. Do you know? Does it last a little bit longer in the refrigerator, or it's about the same?
I don't think it does. I don't think it has a longer shelf life. I've got the number of times I've bought a Beyond Burger fresh. So there's two ways you can get a frozen and a fresh one. I've only bought the fresh ones, and I think the longest it stays on the shelf, even refrigerated, is about a week. I think that's the longest it goes. So I'm not sure if that compares similar to beef. But yeah, Beyond Meat, I think it's at most a week that it can stay out there.
So a couple of people asked this question about vertical farming. So my understanding is they're just growing pea proteins in a field. And I don't think they're using vertical farming. Kimball Musk does vertical farming in a company called Square Roots. And I don't think they're growing protein type vegetables on those farms. I wouldn't say it's impossible, and it may be something that would make sense in the future, but as far as I know, they're not doing it yet. What about, as people are asking this, and I love this question, what about for Mars? Is lab-based meat better for Mars? Is plant-based meat better for Mars? How do we get meat to Mars? How do we grow meat on Mars?
That's going to be hard to do because we'll need a lot of vegetables, or at least vegetable proteins to Mars. So before we get that, we need an entire vegetation.
But if you want meat on Mars and you're going to do it with cows, number one, that would be pretty hard to do. But number two, you would have to use more land, or you would have to grow more vegetables to feed the cows than you would grow vegetables to make the meat with Beyond Meat's process.
Right.
And it may be that, and it may actually be the reason that Kimball Musk is involved with lab-based meat is because that has more promise for Mars. Mm-hmm. It may be that approach is going to be better for Mars. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah, I think it's also cultural. I mean, like some people that I've noticed, at least on Twitter, it's a pretty touchy subject, I think, talking about this, right? Because people are, some people don't even admit, right, that meat is a problem, right? Yeah. So some people actually think that it's the method of preparation, and that's a fair point, right? Some people can be extremely healthy and still be, carnivores, right?
Right.
Many people are like that, right? And so, the question is are we generalizing, a little bit too much, right? So some people actually get, sort of, defensive on this whole idea that plant-based meats are necessarily better for you and the environment. And those people tend to also side with cultured meat, I've noticed, just in general. So this could be a similar situation as brand loyalty in the auto world, where people that drive Ford will never go to anything else. There could be something similar to that here. I'm not fully sure, but it looks like that could be the case.
Okay. So, somebody asked about pesticides and herbicides. I think that growing the pea proteins, I think they grow peas or something along the line of peas. They probably do use some pesticides and herbicides in the process of growing the peas, but that usage is a lot less than the pesticides and herbicides that are used to grow the stuff they feed the cows to make the meat, because they have to produce a lot more vegetables to feed the cows than they do to just go direct to meat. Let's see. Oh, Jim asks, let's go with a general question. I like Jim's question here. Jim Whitehead is one of the moderators. He says, where is Mayur putting his investment money now? I think I know the answer, but I'll let you answer it.
I'm buying, basically I have a general approach to buying stocks, right? And that is, I love companies that address these key points: high growth, high ROIC, attacking a major pain point, solving a major problem, pushing costs down, building products that people love. So that's the general investment strategy. So once I've found a list of companies that satisfy each of those criteria, then I literally just sit and wait for short-term sentiment to get pessimistic. I love buying big corrections. And I'm talking about like 30-40% drops, similar to what Tesla's already gone through from the all-time high. It reached 900 plus, went all the way down to 550, I believe, at the low. So I was there buying, that correction as well. So I love when companies get hit hard and sentiment turn from super bullish to pessimistic or super bearish, even like what happened last year. So I literally spend all my time finding companies, and then I sit and wait until, sentiment gets that bad. So Beyond Meat is actually at that point right now. It's hit a high of 200. It's pulled back dramatically since then because of, the question of whether, they can make their margins through restaurants and the entire reopening story there. So Beyond Meat is a good,
are they at risk of, do they need more funding, or how much cash do they have, and are they at risk of needing to do another funding round? What's their situation?
Yeah, I think they will be doing a funding round pretty soon. I don't think that's going to be a big negative on the stock though, because the market already understands that. Maybe the stock goes down 1 or 2% the day that they announce it, but it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be dramatic.
Okay, so a couple questions. So John Yent says, is Beyond Meat publishing any information on how to replace ground beef in recipes? It's really simple. You use the Beyond Meat ground beef in the same recipe that you would use regular ground beef. And maybe there are some applications where there's some other kind of meat you can make, but I think I'm correct that you're just replacing ground beef with this, and it is effectively the same texture and flavor as the goal as if you were using regular ground beef, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, so then there's this question I love, and I think I have an answer, but I want to hear your answer first. What's the barrier to entry for another plant-based meat startup?
It's R&D. It's know-how, right? Yeah. I think there's a reason why. There are other entrants that are coming.
Doesn't Tyson have its own plant-based?
They do.
Company?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. Tyson has their own. I think it's called Raised and Rooted, I believe. There's also another brand as well. So yeah, there are other brands. There's Gardein. That's the other brand too, Gardein, which you should also see in grocery stores.
I thought Gardein was a vegetarian. Was what do you call it? A veggie burger type brand. Are they going?
I think they're also making they also have chicken products as well now.
Okay.
I don't know if they have a burger, but I definitely have seen their chicken products in stores.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's competition, but I think the barriers to entry are going to be R&D, brand recognition, and manufacturing scale. Right now, no one has the manufacturing volume at the gross margins that Beyond Meat has had. And Beyond Meat has maintained 30 to 35% gross margins during this entire time. Nobody else can match that right now.
Okay, question from Mooney Real, and I'm going to answer this one. Is the Impossible Whopper Beyond Meat? No, the Impossible Whopper is Impossible Foods, which is a competitor to Beyond Meat, but is not Impossible Foods is not currently a publicly traded company. It's a privately held company. There have been rumors that they're going to IPO and people will be able to buy stock in it, but they're not there yet. And Nick Giannotti asked the question, what will happen to cows? And I think you expressed concern that we're being inhumane to animals by killing them for food. It's a really interesting thing. Have you heard of John? What's his name? There's this libertarian guy, used to be on ABC and he's on Fox News, John Stossel. And he said, animals are headed towards extinction. The way you can save them is eat them. That when animals that we eat are, widespread, like there's, millions or billions of the animals that we eat. The animals that we don't eat tend to die off. So animals face a greater threat of extinction if we don't eat them. Right. That in that theory, but I think your theory about what will happen to cows is, well, the plant-based meats aren't going to wipe out all cows. right? I think you're feeling, at least in the short to medium term, is we're not going to wipe out all animal agriculture right away. It's going to take a while if we ever get there. Is that right?
Yeah, and I mean the animal population is only that high because we make it that high, right? Breeding, the cultivation of beef cows and dairy cows are manufactured by us, right? Through artificial insemination, all of that stuff. So, the population of these animals wouldn't be so high in the first place if it weren't for our consumption needs, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, I think cows will be quite happy if more people switch to plant-based meat.
Well, the ones that are still alive will be happy, but
right.
So Philip asked this question. I love this question. Philip asked, and I'm going to say, apply this to Tesla, Philip, and tell me why it hasn't happened. Can't any food company reverse engineer Beyond Meat? And I would say the answer is that's probably even harder than reverse engineering a Tesla.
It's tough. It's hard, and they own a lot of patents too. Beyond Meat does. Impossible does as well, but it's going to be hard. And again, it just goes back to like their continuous iteration, right? These products aren't standstill, right? There's Beyond Meat 1.0, 2.0, now we're at 3.0, and there's going to be more iterations, and they're going to continue to iterate in getting closer and closer to replicating, animal-based protein, and they're never going to stop doing it. So even if they were to reverse engineer today's Beyond Burger, it's going to be obsolete by next year anyway.
I've seen a couple more people ask this question, which we answered earlier. Does it last longer in the refrigerator than animal-based meat? As far as we know, the answer to that question is no. But I haven't seen the claim made that it lasts longer in the refrigerator, right? You haven't seen that claim made,
right?
Either.
No, I don't think that's a claim that the company makes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So I don't see any questions we haven't covered yet. When will Tesla hit $200,000 a share?
2 weeks.
Well, we could close. Let's talk about Tesla just really quick. So let me just bounce we're going to change tack for Tesla for just a second. My thesis for Tesla in 2026 is that the current factories that we know about before the Battery Day vehicle factories, right? At Battery Day, they said we're going to be making this $25,000 vehicle. And Elon, talking to Sandy Monroe, talked about the next generation factory, and he's not going to tell us what it is until Austin and Berlin are up and running. But you look at what they're building in Austin right now. You look at what they're building in Berlin right now. You look at the factories in Fremont and Shanghai, and I see those factories that we know about ultimately producing in the bulk when they're fully ramped, fully ramped, not, all the lines, all the vehicles, they're going to produce what we see before we get to the Battery Day vehicle. I think all those factories together could produce 6 million vehicles a year. Particularly Texas and Berlin are going to produce more than what we see now in Fremont and Shanghai. And then on top of that, you have this Battery Day vehicle, which presumably is going to be produced even at a higher volumes than the factories we see now. So my thesis is, forgive me if I'm wrong, or if you don't like it, but that if Giga Texas is going to produce, say, 2 million vehicles a year, then the next generation factory should produce 4 million vehicles a year. So if you have 3 of those, one in China, one in the US, and one in Europe, that's 12 million vehicles a year. And if you start building those factories, or those factories start selling cars in 2023, by 2026, those should be fully ramped. And so you've got 6 million from the factories we know about, plus 12 million more from the Battery Day vehicle. You've got 18 million vehicles sold in 2026. That's a lot of growth. and then you could get into the robotaxi or FSD revenue. But that's why I think, so when I did my model, and I don't have the model fresh in my head, that's why I get to $25,000 a share in 2026. So what part of that is crazy? Because I don't think you get that high with Tesla in 2026.
No, I don't. I don't know if Tesla will actually be producing that many cars.
Why not?
Well, because, okay, so if we look at total vehicle sales today, globally, it's about 80 million cars, right? 80 million total.
80 or 90, yeah.
Right.
Global, yeah.
So if they get to about 18 million cars by 2026, or even by the end of the decade, that's almost 25% market share right?
Well, I think
Oh,
the global market by then should grow to 100 million, but okay. It's 20, let's call it 20% market share.
okay, yeah, 20% more. So that would make Tesla the biggest, in terms of market share, right, in the world,
I like the sound
even
of that.
relative to the market share leader today, which is Toyota, I believe.
Yeah.
Or it could be, I think it's back and forth between Toyota and Volkswagen. So yeah, that would be that. But okay, so let's say if we get there, right? Um, if the end goal is actually robo taxis, if that's the end goal of Tesla is to achieve robo taxis, right? I don't think that the world would necessarily need that many cars. Because if robo taxis are launched, the cost per mile of a robo taxi will be lower, significantly lower than what Uber and Lyft can do today. I think that that will then discourage vehicle ownership overall by the masses. And the only people that would be buying cars would be fleet operators and Tesla, right?
Yes, 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 yes to all of that.
So I think that there will be significantly less cars that are needed to transport the world's population.
Okay, let
back
me
and
address
forth.
that. Elon says there's 2 billion vehicles in the world. I think he's including more than just passenger cars when he says that. So, and my take on it is a robo-taxi passenger vehicle replaces at least 5 non-robo-taxi passenger vehicles. So if we're going to replace, let's say, 1 billion vehicles, we need 200 million of them. Now, maybe a robo-taxi replaces 8, and we don't need 200 million, we need 125 million. But it's going to take a while to get to 125 million robo-taxis if you're producing 20 million a year. That's still 6 years away. And then, some of the vehicles they're going to produce are replacing commercial vehicles that are used more than 2 hours a day.
Mhm.
So I think there's a little bit of that. But the other thing that I think people, I've had this conversation with others before, and I think the other thing that people are missing is I see as we approach, let's say, 100 million robo-taxis in the world, and Kathy Wood says this as well, the price per mile of the ride goes down. So in the beginning, the price per mile of a robo-taxi ride might be $1.50, $2 a mile. I think pretty quickly it gets down to around $1 a mile, which is still extremely profitable for Tesla or whoever owns the robo-taxi. Once you drop below 70, 60 cents a mile, Tasha Keeney at 70 cents, the number I've seen was 60 cents, but I'll go with Tasha because I love her. People who own cars start to switch, right, to taking robo-taxis instead of owning cars. But when you get down to the 25 cents a mile that ARK Invest talks about, and I think it can actually go lower than that, now the cost of traveling costs less and people travel more. So to give a hypothetical example, Tesla Boring Company builds a tunnel from here where I'm in South Florida, and easily 20% of the population here loves going to Disney. Okay, and Disney's 150 miles away, ballpark 150 miles away. So Boring Company builds a boring tunnel from South Florida to Orlando, and there's like it literally pops up in Disney Springs, which for those who aren't familiar with Disney World is like a shopping and restaurant area outside Disney. And there's literally a stop right in Disney Springs. And you hop in a robo minivan that carries 10 people and you pay like $10 each way. And it gets you there in an hour instead of the 3-hour drive it takes now. And you don't have to worry about parking. You don't have to stay in a hotel because you ride back at the end of the day. Right? Yep. You just go home at the end of the day and you go back the next day and it's $20 round trip. That's cheaper than staying in a hotel. It could dramatically increase the number of miles driven. And that expands the market for vehicles rather than shrinking the market for vehicles. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yeah, that could increase. Yeah, the demand for transportation.
Okay,
yeah.
So I'm going to take this a step further, and I'm going to bounce off you my insane idea that people who follow my channel have heard me say before. I actually have started. I spent money, and I've hired someone as a contractor to start my project. I don't know if you've heard about my idea. I want to build a single passenger robo-taxi. I'm not going to build the software to drive the vehicle, but I want to build what I think is the ideal vehicle for a single passenger robo-taxi. And actually, my target market isn't really the United States. My target market is poor countries. because I think I can get the cost to the operator per mile, the owner of the vehicle, down like to a penny a mile or less. And then you can charge a nickel a mile for a ride and still make significant money. And if you're talking about 25 cents a mile for a ride, and you're talking to lower middle class people in India, they still can't afford that. Right. I was talking to a guy who's from Egypt, and you're saying, you really have to get the price down. Maybe the Robo minibus starts to make sense in India or Egypt, but you really have to drive the price down to make that affordable to even middle class people in India or Egypt. So if you can get it to where it's like a penny a mile for the owner of the fleet owner, and they can, give rides for 3-4 cents a mile, that might actually be attainable. And so my vision is, can we accelerate the transition to sustainable transportation to the world's poor, to the middle class in poor countries, and maybe even poor people in poor countries? Robo tuk-tuk, as somebody said. Is that a word, tuk-tuk? People keep saying that word. Do people actually call it that?
Yeah, they do. Some people do. Yeah.
So what do you think about that idea? And then now you're even more increasing the number of miles traveled, because if you could drive the price down, instead of 25 cents a mile, if I can get the price down to a nickel mile, now you're even more increasing the demand. So you even have even more travel. Does this make sense? Arcimoto's not my competition. I'm sorry, Christopher, Arcimoto's not my competition. They're not doing the same thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I was thinking of Arcimoto as well when you were talking about that single passenger. I think whoever can solve transportation at the lowest cost, right? And making the entire fleet fully electric, and sourcing the power to charge those batteries from renewable energy, they've won this whole game.
Yeah. So no, and just to be clear, my idea is an incredibly simple, like I'm thinking, all right, if I can do it without brakes, no brakes, no suspension, it's wheels and tires and axles, I think, and a frame and a seat and a shell. So for aerodynamics, and like, I haven't decided yet whether we have HVAC, I think you need HVAC to keep the batteries temperature right, but I'm not sure. But make it as absolutely simple as possible so you can get the cost down crazy. Sorry. So, but you mentioned, I'll tell you why Arcimoto is not the competition. Arcimoto, I believe the current Arcimoto vehicle is $18,000. Now I know it's not an EV, but I drive a Volkswagen Passat that I paid $18,000 for, brand new. I paid 18 for a 5-passenger vehicle that will go over 100 miles an hour and has, not at 100 miles an hour, but at say 70 miles an hour. I can go 600 or 700 miles of range on that thing. Gets like 40 miles a gallon on the highway. So the problem with all the single passenger vehicles that people keep sending me, hey, Warren, you want to do a single passenger vehicle? Check this one out, check this one out, check this one out. They're all designed to be driven. I'm designing one that's designed that's built for self-driving. No one has done that I've seen. So sorry, that's often, that's a little bit of a
you just have to figure out the software side of that equation.
So the idea is to build the platform and then hope that I figure it's going to take me 3 years minimum to get to the point where I have a viable product. And hopefully in 3 years, then there'll be a company that will sell me their FSD hardware and software. Hopefully Tesla, but Tesla's probably going to be too expensive. So it's going to be Comma or somebody like that. Because you can't if you spend too much on the hardware and software, then you've screwed your price per mile.
Right.
Your cost per mile goes up if you spend $10,000 on if it's $1,000 to build the vehicle, but it's $10,000 for the FSD and the self-driving hardware and software, then you've screwed your pricing.
Yeah. So. And keep in mind for poor countries, roads are a lot trickier in places like India than here.
Yeah.
Where you have to dodge not only cars but animals too.
So, well, I would say our safety. Look, I think the software is going to figure that out. I think the neural networks are going to figure all that stuff out fast.
Yeah.
I think that once it gets U.S. roads, then Dojo is going to help it get Indian roads and Egypt roads, and the truth is that human drivers don't do that well in the complex environment there's a lot of traffic deaths around the world with human drivers. Actually, my target market was my first target market in my dreams is the Dominican Republic, which has, I think, the highest traffic fatality rate in the world. And it's not far from here. There's a lot of drunk drivers hitting pedestrians. right? So can you get the drunk drivers to ride in this thing instead of driving drunk? That's the idea. So I don't see any more questions. I went off on my tangent, and as I love talking about this idea. Anything else you want to talk about there?
No, I mean, that's just basically the whole, idea behind Beyond Meat, right? It's ultimately, are we solving the problem, right?
Yeah.
There is a massive problem that meat, creates for both health and environment. So if this is a company that's attacking it, and if there's a compelling product that people love, and so far, I mean, the reviews are great. I mean, yeah, there's always someone out there that doesn't like it, but the vast majority of people love Beyond Meat products. The burgers are great. So, if they continue to do this, and if they continue to iterate to the point where the meat is indistinguishable from beef, I don't see why this is not a runaway opportunity for a company like Beyond Meat. So I think I view the stock as, a more of like an option because of its upside potential. The max loss is obviously 100%, right? But the max upside, I think, could be, a 10 bagger.
You think this is 10x or more? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we've gone for nearly 2 hours. I want to thank you so much for taking this time with me. And we definitely had an audience that was engaged in the chat and watching, and hopefully they'll watch more. I mean, people will watch this later or tomorrow. So Mayur, I want to thank you very much. For everybody else, as I'm about to wrap up this video, please check out my other videos. Support the channel on Patreon. I'd love to thank the Vasa Law Firm in Sweden and all my Patreon supporters for helping the channel grow. And thanks everyone for watching. I'm going to end the stream. Hang on with me, Mayur.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's over. The chat goes on.